Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I'm Ryan Wormeli, joined today by Andrew Erickson and by Chris Welsh. Fellas, we are talking some wide receivers to buy. They can be buy lows or buy highs. We're talking some wide receivers to sell. They can be sell lows or sell highs. It is our trade show here for week 5. Let's dive right in with some wide receivers that we're looking to buy. Welsh, who do you got for us?
All right, this I guess is kind of a buy low, but briefly talking about when we did our running backs, this is buying a opportunity for a breakout. This is the same thing. I'm going to be buying a lower named wide receiver for breakout opportunity, and that wide receiver is Ladd McConkey. So McConkey so far, 7 targets in 3 of his first 4 games, which is fantastic. He scored twice, and even though this isn't like a high-powered passing offense, which I think can keep people off of him, we've seen some decent results. Now, here's what's going to surprise you. I've got 3 top 25 in the league categories that Ladd sits in. Top 25 of wide receivers in the league. Here you go. Number 1, he is 13th in the league in team target percentage. He is 12th in the league in team yard percentage and 23rd in the league in first read percentage, and is one of only 23 wide receivers total that have a 30% or higher first read share. Another fun thing, Ladd currently ranks, if you look at PFF's wide receiver route grades, he is the 7th overall wide receiver route grade, sandwiched between Deebo Samuel and Malik Neighbors. So much of this is speaking to this breakout potential for Ladd McConkey. The thing I think that holds him back is the offense. Continuous high ankle sprain for Justin Herbert and being able to throw the ball, but he's becoming one of and in their top guy from a first read perspective. He's getting yards after the catch. He's running the slot, which you like to see. I don't know if a wide receiver in the Chargers offense can ever be a top 15 fantasy option, but this early on for a rookie wide receiver to put up some of these numbers, not just in the league, but for their own team, I really think Ladd has this really solid floor that does not equate to his current value in the market. And I think there is so much more upside that is also not being accounted for. I think based on a lot of these performances, people are just would be willing to throw Ladd in. I would not be surprised if rest of season, even if you give me like week 6 on or something like that, that if we saw Ladd as like a top 25 wide receiver, you love to see him getting red zone targets. You love to see him becoming the safety net. And J.K. Dobbins helping that run game helps the passing game. So I am trying to buy a breakout of Ladd McConkey.
Yeah, Erickson, I love Ladd the player. Obviously, the question marks are going to constantly be just the offense that he's in, and how run heavy it is, and the health of Justin Herbert. This, I guess, comes down to like efficiency versus volume. Do you view Ladd McConkey as a wide receiver to buy also?
I do. I think that one of the sharp things that you can do this week is look at teams that are on bye weeks. Ladd is on a bye week along with I believe it's the Eagles that are also on a bye week. The Lions are on a bye week, the Chargers. And this is a sharp move to make because Ladd's going to score 0 points this week. And some managers don't like that. So buying low on a player that the counting stats aren't really there for McConkey, but he's doing what we kind of expected. Hey, he is the target share leader on a low passing offense, but he's showing that efficiency that usually tends to highlight, hey, this guy's good, right? We liked his prospect profile coming in. It was a little incomplete because it wasn't on a massive sample size, but he's productive so far. And again, he's taken advantage of Josh Palmer missing time with injuries. I know I like Josh Palmer a lot, but he's consistently to be banged up. So yeah, I like Ladd a lot as a rookie receiver. Again, with him, I think the floor, and you hit on this, Welsh, I think the floor is safe with him because I feel confident that he's going to be the target share leader moving forward. The only issue is, okay, well, what's the ceiling? And I think that really comes down to a week-to-week debate where can the Chargers play another team that actually forces them to have to throw the ball more, right? They haven't really had that opportunity yet, even against the Chiefs. Well, their tackles are out, half the Chiefs players are injured, and that's how you get a 17-10 ball game where Justin Herbert's not dropping back to throw 30-plus times. And that's going to be the norm. They're not going to throw a lot, but rest assured, hey, McConkey's at least going to get the targets in low volume games, but in an occasional game where, hey, we're down 21, we got to air it out. We have these stud tackles that are back from their injuries. McConkey's going to benefit a ton from that. And I don't think that's valued enough in his price tag. So I really like this one.
I totally agree, especially about the targeting guys on buys, because especially if you find a manager who has a losing record right now, they can't afford to be taking zeros. They need guys who can contribute right away because you just can't drop another game. So that's a great situation to take advantage of. Erickson, who is your favorite wide receiver to buy?
I am buying high. Enough of these buy low wide receivers. I'm going after the big enchilada here, Diontae Johnson. So with Diontae, again, he's been an absolute monster over the last 2 weeks, ever since the Red Rifle took over under center. But I think that he still might not be valued where his actual new role is in this offense. Again, Dave Canales talked about all offseason, this offense runs through Diontae Johnson. How many receivers do we talk about the offense running through them? Malik Neighbors is an example, but it's really the top tier guys where their offenses are completely centered around these receivers. So for me, Diontae Johnson, again, super productive 2 weeks in a row. But what I'm seeing when I'm watching him play is he's still leaving production on the table. Like, there are opportunities for him to score not just one touchdown, but multiple touchdowns in back-to-back games. He leads the NFL in red zone targets. I talked about this ad nauseum with Jamar Chase as my wide receiver one heading into the season. What's the easiest path for a receiver to become the number one fantasy receiver in fantasy football? Is leading the NFL in red zone targets. The correlation is so obvious over the last couple of years who the receiver number one has been. They've also led the NFL in red zone targets. Now, I'm not saying Diontae Johnson's going to be the wide receiver one with Andy Dalton, as great as a story that would be. But I'm saying his upside, I don't think the manager in your league may not realize. This guy could be I think top 5. If he has this role week in and week out in this offense, he really could be that productive. So that's kind of why I look at him as a buy high. Again, talked about he leads the NFL in red zone targets. And that's including 2 weeks with Bryce Young as his quarterback. You look at him in total targets, he is 3rd, only behind Malik Neighbors and Nico Collins. If you look at PFF's expected fantasy points model, he's 5th expected fantasy points per game this season. He's ranked 3rd in that category over the last 2 weeks. Who is valuing Diontae Johnson as a top 5 wide receiver? Nobody, right? And I'm just saying, based on what we've seen, again, it is a smaller sample size. I think that you have the upside of a potential top 5 receiver that manager may not realize. So that's why Diontae Johnson for me is a buy high.
Are you worried at all that after a several week reset for Bryce Young that they say, listen, like, we need to just give him another chance, and we put so much into him and we're going to make the playoffs anyway, and let's give him the last month and a half of the season? Are you worried about that thought process coming into play at all, and then that nuking Deontay's value for the playoffs?
I don't think so, because how do you sell the team on going back to Bryce Young if he's the worst quarterback, right? I understand. I think that you're bringing up a really good point, because this is something that it has been discussed. Could they go back to Bryce Young? I don't think that they will. I mean, Dave Canales is trying to win games, right? We've seen this organization and management fire coaches because they don't win games in their first year. Dave Canales, what if he didn't make the move to go to Andy Dalton? What if he just kept putting Bryce Young out there? I can't fix this guy. Well, then you're going to get fired. So I don't know. I'm not overly concerned about that. I think that Dalton's going to be the guy for the long term. Maybe really late down the line when they're out of contention. But when you look at the NFC South, right, it might be a while for them to get eliminated from the playoff contention, especially if they continue to play well with Andy Dalton. So I admit I hadn't really thought too much about that. Obviously, you're chasing the upside with Dalton at quarterback, but that definitely does bring a red flag into the conversation. So I'm glad that you brought that up, Warren.
Welsh, Diontae Johnson is wide receiver 21 in the expert consensus rest of season rankings. Where do you have him?
Yeah, right around that general area, like maybe like 18, 19. One thing I want to throw in, I think that's maybe an interesting thing to do with this as well, is I want to say it was, and apologies if I'm forgetting who it was. It was Schefter, was on a show yesterday. It could have been another one of the NFL analysts, but they ended up saying kind of offhandedly that Diontae Johnson is gone after this year from the Panthers, like that's already a known thing. So if you have the Panthers that are out of it, there are wide receiver needy teams out there. On top of all of this, Diontae Johnson could be a top trade target. Now that could speak to some teams, except if it were to be the Kansas City Chiefs, and he could end up being the number one guy. Then to also kind of throw into your other thing where you talk about Bryce, I think if you have Bryce Young coming in, this is a situation where this team is out of it, that I think the team will have made the decision to also maybe move off of an Andy Dalton to get some acquisition, and there are teams that are quarterback hungry. So if Dalton goes, I think Diontae goes. I'm not sure I see a situation where they play this out to the end of the year. But even without those scenarios, like everything is in play for Diontae. He is the target monster. He makes the offense better and the team better. And then I think more situations than not, if Diontae were to be moved, it's just an extra plus because of the offense. Like the Chiefs is obviously one where we're all just like, oh my God, he can be the Rashid Rice role. But like, I think there's so many different things in play that make the Diontae Johnson one just a really good floor with all this great high ceiling. Like, I don't know if he's going to be top 5, but you're probably buying him around the 20s. And there's a very, very foreseeable future where he could be a top 12 wide receiver. So we talk about this sometimes. There are guys that like when you trade for them, their value does not, what you're buying them for doesn't equate to like where they really can be. Because sometimes people want more. They want too much for a guy like, well, this is where he's going to be. Deontay's not one of those guys where I think people are like future processing him. So I really, really like the idea. This was one of the guys I was looking at if I wanted to pick a higher name than Diontae. So I think this is a good one.
Erickson, I know you laid out the case for how he could finish higher than this, but where exactly are you ranking him? Are you around that wide receiver 21 range, or do you actually have him higher?
So I thought that I had updated this. I thought I had him higher, but right now I have wide receiver 20. So he's in that range for me. And it's funny that the arguments you guys push back on Diontae were related to him having Bryce Young as his quarterback, not like any of the other data points. I figured you guys were going to be like, this is not sustainable. He can't keep this up. But you guys, no, he's going to see all the targets. Like, we're not worried about that.
We made that case in August of how we thought it was going to be with Bryce Young. We thought Bryce Young was going to be better, but we made the case that he's going to get every target of this offense. I said in PPR drafts, he was going in like the 8th or 9th round. I was like, it's one of the best values in drafts because he is going to get every target. So I'm fully with you there.
Okay, great. So that makes you feel good. And then if Bryce Young plays, then it's disaster. And that's the reason why Diontae Johnson doesn't finish as a wide receiver 1. But I have wide receiver 20. I probably should move him up. I thought I had him higher, honestly. So I'm probably going to move him up. But I think that's an appropriate range. I just think that he comes with a super high floor, like we talked about with McConkey, because he's going to see the target volume. And there's untapped potential with the role he has in this offense. Just he's seeing so many red zone targets. I think that this is just a really good spot for Diontae. And when you look at him compared to the other receivers in his range, Reed, Aiyuk, Diggs, Pickens, Jameson, I mean, are all of those guys like super alphas in their offenses? I mean, I'd be happily trade Stephon Diggs to get Diontae Johnson, right? And I think they're ranked pretty similar in rest of season rankings. So look, Diggs has been pretty good this year, but Dell has been injured, and it's so clear that Nico is the guy in that offense. That's not the case here with Diontae.
Maybe I'm silly. I feel like you could easily get Diontae for Diggs. I do think those type of trades are really tough. We always want to talk about them, but like who's trading like wide receiver for wide receiver? It's usually off position stuff, but I don't know. I feel like 8 out of 10 times you could offer Diggs and get Diontae Johnson and in a perceived value. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe those people listen to a ton of Fantasy Pros, but I feel like that would be an easier get if you were actually doing that.
Depends on the league too. If you're in a league with maybe more casual players, they might be more drawn to the brand name guy. So it's just, I mean,
that's kind of what I'm referring to.
Context dependent. Yeah. Let's go to the wide receivers to sell. Welsh, who you got?
Oh, okay. All right. Hand up. I actually could have made the argument to buy or sell. And I sat on this for about a day about which side do I want to go on, because I think there's an easy long-term future production argument to why you can buy this guy. But ultimately, I decided to sell. And guess what? I would sell this player for Diontae Johnson. I am selling Brandon Aiyuk. Now, the reason that you could still buy is just like his performance does not equate to what we've seen for him before. We know how dominant he can be. But this year, the fallback has been pretty dramatic. His air yard share is down from 39 to 22% year over year so far. Team yard percentage down 31, cut in half to 14%. Target percentage is down from 22 to 19, but that's the weird part. Team yards and air are so dramatically down, but the target percentage isn't that far down. His first read is down 29 to 1. Also, his yards per route run are down from like 3.5 to 1.5. He has just not been the same. Didn't practice. That can play a big role in it. He's not clicking with the offense, sure. But Juwan Jennings, we legit have to look at Juwan Jennings because I think he does play a big role in this. He's seeing the uptick in air yards right now, 27%. That is quite a bit higher than Brandon Aiyuk. His target percentage is about the same as Aiyuk, but his first read is higher. So it's what you know about the 49ers. They've got so many weapons. Last year, though, it was just always primarily Debo and Aiyuk with some Kittle, and then you had McCaffrey. This year, Juwan Jennings, he's going to keep getting some first reads. He is the bigger play option. They're using and doing shorter stuff with Brandon Aiyuk, where sometimes you would get those big plays. That is now Juwan Jennings' role. He is taking some snap share, even with these guys being injured. It's not just about him taking the Debo role anymore. There's not a good connection right now with Aiyuk and Purdy. I think Aiyuk is going to have some big games, but I don't know if he's going to get right back to last year because Jordan Mason looks dominant. Kittle is back. You now have 3 wide receivers, and this offense will sometimes just push and breed other big guys like from week to week. And I think we've always known that. So here's the tough thing about this as well. Things aren't good. Like you're selling Brandon Aiyuk when things aren't good. If you can get Diontae Johnson, I think that's fair. I'm concerned that Brandon Aiyuk is going to be a lot of this all year. 5 or 6 targets, 3 or 4 catches, 2 or 3 games that are big, nice big games. But Jennings is taking, clearly on paper, is taking plenty of that share. And there's no reason that they're going to go away from that when he has a higher first read. So my in thesis to it is where I think there are versions to buy. And I might look back on this in a month and be like, oh, yep, Brandon Aiyuk, he's back. It just took a month. I think at this point, based on how this offense is rolling, which is also a little bit inefficient, that even without McCaffrey and perceived more targets out there, they're just going to Jennings. And I think they're moving a little bit further away from Brandon Aiyuk more than ever. So maybe you wait a week, see if you can have that. Cardinals are coming up, as former ASU Sunbelt. Maybe there's going to be just some let's get him going and ramped up. I'm selling him after. I'm not going to buy into the hype. Oh, he had 8 targets and 125 yards. He's back. No, I think I'm going to sell it. And if I got a nice offer of like a Diontae right now, I would probably do that as well.
They are back-to-back in the rest of the season rankings. According to ECR, Aiyuk is wide receiver 20. Diontae Johnson, as I mentioned, wide receiver 21. Erickson, how do you view Aiyuk? Is he a sell for you also?
Aiyuk is definitely tough, and I definitely understand why Welsh had so much. He thought so much about, is he a buy? Is he a sell? Super polarizing player because we know how good he can be like he was last year. But when I was watching that 49ers-Patriots game, that's not the Aiyuk I know. That's not the Aiyuk that I watched last year melt faces in the 49ers offense. I don't know who that man is. Jennings looks way better than Brandon Aiyuk does.
But that also makes it tough when you're like, oh, I got to be off of him because he doesn't look right. And you could foresee like, oh, he will just be right. It was so off that it feels weird to be like he's done. That's what makes this so complicated.
I think for me, and Welsh, you kind of alluded to this, he's going to have a big week at some point. Because that's just how this 49ers offense functions. Yeah. One guy goes off, usually it's because guys miss time, but usually somebody always feasts every single week, plus the running back that whichever one is starting. So I guess for me, and you mentioned this too, I think you just got to wait till Aiyuk has that monster game because they want to justify the contract and they got to make sure they force him targets to make sure that he scores touchdown because they paid him $30 million. We need to make sure we get Aiyuk going in some capacity. So once that happens, once he has a 2-touchdown game and everyone declares he is back, that's when you sell for the farm because we know that's not going to last. Again, we see, this 49ers offense like the back of your hand. It's 1 week it's Aiyuk, 1 week it's Jennings, 1 week it's Kittle, 1 week it's Mason, right? So I think that's the only thing I would and again, you mentioned this before, but I would say comes with the caveat that if you can sell Aiyuk now for a really good return where it's like you're selling him after a big touchdown game, then just do it now and don't have to wait for it to actually produce. Don't take a risk of injury or anything like that. And who knows, again, how long he's going to get out of this funk. It could be this week, or maybe it's weeks away still as he starts to kind of get his legs underneath him. So those are my thoughts on Aiyuk. But yes, a very polarizing player. I'm glad you threw him in the sheet this week.
Yeah, I was very unsurprised, Welsh, when you said that you could have gone either way because I was thinking the same thing.
I almost literally put together, I was like, I think I could maybe sell the buy. But you know what? When you look at like the evidence in front of you, there's just so much more. And I guess it's more just stat stuff. But, for the people that are like, everybody watch it. That's all we do. This is our job. We watch the games all the time. Aiyuk has visibly not looked good. And then you look on paper and you're like, okay, cool. What are the things that are going to tell me that he can bounce back? There's nothing, but it's almost so extreme that you could be like, well, these are just so extreme that he's got to get better. So it's that weird dynamic of like everything says this is not good, but it's so wildly out of pocket. It just doesn't seem like it would hold. So yeah, again, sorry, like, Niners, I get fired up about Aiyuk and everything like that, but it's just like whatever narrative you want to paint, you can. I just think the safer one is, God, if you can get Diontae or you can move off, you just want to maybe get out from it and not fool yourself in to like a 1 week Aiyuk explode. Like he goes off and you're like, I did it. I held through. It's all good now. Like, no, it's not going to probably be good. It's probably the time to get out.
It would have been a funny bit if you had him as your wide receiver to buy and also had him.
Oh, that would have been, see, come on, get to me
Back
before
again,
that. That would have been good. Yeah.
Missed opportunity.
But then like I do like what I have like one side of my face here for buy and then the other side for sell. That would have
exactly. All right, Eric, so who's your wide receiver to sell?
I'm going to sell Minnesota Vikings wide receiver Jordan Addison, who came back in week 4 after missing a couple games with an ankle injury. Monster game. He scored 2 touchdowns, 3 of 4 targets for 72 receiving yards. He had a rushing touchdown. He had his normal role. He basically put Jalen Naylor back on the bench. But look, someone in this Vikings offense is going to regress at some point. Sam Darnold has a 10% touchdown passing rate that is way too high for him to sustain the entire season. He's actually on pace for 47 touchdowns, which is more passing touchdowns than his entire 5-year Jets career. So yes, he's being very productive. I don't think that it's going to be sustained at this high of a rate. And I think that Addison is the one that probably feels the most from it from a negative perspective. And also we have to remember Addison still might get suspended. He has his arraignment and plea hearing for his alleged DUI from the summer scheduled for October 7th. So that is during the Minnesota Vikings bye week. I feel like a lot of us have kind of forgotten about this, where it's not really top of mind, but we're going to get a sentencing from this potential hearing, and then the NFL usually acts after the legislation plays out. So I'm concerned about Addison just missing games straight up at some point in the middle of the season, potentially a 3-game suspension just based on what we see from DUIs. The fact that a lot of his production has been boosted by touchdowns, which goes back to last year. He was a main benefactor of Kirk Cousins throwing for so many touchdowns. And again, give credit to Addison. He's a good player. He's a first-round pick, and he scores touchdowns, but again, where does he fall in the target pecking order? He's number 2 right now behind Jefferson. But what happens when TJ Hawkinson, whose practice window has also opened up, what happens when he comes back? Does Addison then fall to 3 in the pecking order along with the running backs in the passing game? Given that they're playing in London this week against the Jets, it's a bad matchup, good secondary. They have the bye week in week 6. Addison, again, kind of came out of nowhere. We kind of forgot about him. I think that you can sell high after a monster game because we may not see him for a while after this, which is my main concern. I don't think enough people are considering that when looking at Jordan Addison and after a monster week 4.
It's a really good point on the legal side of things. And I think you're right that the Rashid Rice legal stuff got so much of the conversation over the summer because it happened more recently and it felt like there was more of it. And he obviously is like a higher level player that I do think some of the discussion about Jordan Addison's legal stuff kind of got thrown to the wayside. In terms of just the narrative. So I think it's a great point to bring up when trying to make the case for selling him. I'm a little less interested in selling from strictly the player perspective. I think he's a good player who I think he is going to catch a lot of touchdowns in his career when he's on the field. Like I am convinced that is in his skill set. And he was a player I really liked as a prospect, just as a receiver. But I think that legal side is important to hit on. Welsh, what are you doing with Jordan Addison?
Yeah, I don't know if I kind of agree with what you were saying. Like from the talent perspective, this is a tough one because I'm really not sure I buy selling the talent, because one thing we've also seen from Darnold early on is he likes that check down receiver. Clearly you're going to go to Jefferson, but he has done a really good job about finding these other guys. And Naylor was one of those. And this week, they obviously got Addison right back into it also on the rushing side a little bit, which was kind of fun. But I think from like that talent perspective, maybe if it's like this big performance and someone's like, oh my gosh, it's a top 20 wide receiver. Yeah. I think the legal stuff is really hard to gauge here. I wouldn't be shocked. I think you said the arraignment's like the 7th. If they pushed it, if they're just like, oh, hey, football is going on. Can we push this to December? And they do the same thing, kick the can down the road, like the Rashid Rice situation. There's a precedent for that. They also could just have like initial talking and not have any decisions made. So I think if I were only making the decision to sell because of a legal reason, I'm not inclined to necessarily do it. unless if you're getting equal value. If someone is blinders on from that completely and you're getting kind of that equal-ish value to Jordan Addison, maybe even a little bit, or, you're positionally filling yourself out, I think the logic makes a ton of sense. Like, you're just mitigating a little bit of risk. We got enough risk. All these guys are hurt and there's double Achilles tendonitis for everybody. And like, it's bad. It's bad kind of across the league. So if you can mitigate risk without losing anything, a thumbs up. I think that's solid. But I'm just a little less inclined to solely make a move based off of like a hypothetical court situation that can happen in season. But, it was a big performance from Addison. Selling, it's kind of like a true and tried strategy. You sell guys off of these big, massive performances, especially when there's not like a track record of games the rest of the year. So someone's like, oh my gosh, I'm getting this huge guy who's going to score a touchdown every week. Like, if you can take advantage of that, absolutely.
Would you guys take Addison or Shaheed?
See, I think I would probably take Shaheed.
Okay.
I think that's close, even though I was trading him.
Yeah, I think you have to take Shaheed.
So
yeah, that's a great one. So go pull that off if you have Addison. I think that kind of covers the bases.
So in looking at ECR for the rest of the season rankings, Shaheed is up at wide receiver 31. Addison's down at wide receiver 46. Like, if you ignoring the legal side, which you can't ignore, but if we're taking that out of the equation just for the sake of argument, I think wide receiver 46 is too low for Addison. Like,
if there was no legal situation, Erickson, you would agree he'd be inside the top 40 easy.
Yeah, but that legal situation exists.
Very fair point. It's something to like be keeping an eye on. The other thing too is like, one of the reasons I was slightly fading Addison, I wasn't fading him as hard as like say Debro during draft season, but I was fading him to a degree was because I was just worried about the quarterback situation. And I was like, there are people who are worried about if Sam Darnold can support Justin Jefferson as an elite fantasy asset. I'm not going to be trying to get his wide receiver 2 in this offense. And those fears are totally gone now. Like, I mean, I'm not saying Sam Darnold is some elite superstar quarterback, but I am very convinced that in this offense, he is good enough that I am not going to fade a guy just because he's the wide receiver 2 in this offense. If I think he's really talented, like Addison is. Like, for me, the only interest in selling at this current ranking, and again, if he was being ranked in the 20s, I would feel differently. But at his current value, the only reason I'm interested in selling is legal stuff, which again, I think is a great point and cannot actually be ignored. I'm just ignoring it for the sake of argument. Let's go to some buy, sell, or hold receivers. Got a couple of trios here. First trio, T. Higgins, Xavier Worthy, Khalil Shakir. We're buying, selling, holding. T. Higgins, Xavier Worthy, Khalil Shakir. Erickson, you can go first here.
I always sell the receiver that had the best game. And for me, that's T. Higgins. So that's what I'm going to sell is T. Higgins. He does this all the time where he has big games and disappears the next week. So that's who I think I can get the most for potentially. Maybe I could get more for Xavier Worthy,
100%.
But I just like Xavier Worthy too much. And I could be reading this totally wrong. And he might be the sharp sell high because I'm looking at it as, and maybe other managers are looking at, he's going to get all the targets now because Rice is out. That's not probably the case of what's going to actually happen. So maybe I'm convincing myself otherwise. But going back to you guys just being high on Addison as a talent, I love Worthy. I thought that he was so great at Texas, super dynamic. I thought he was Deshaun Jackson 2.0 and putting him with Patrick Mahomes. I thought we were going to see more of what we saw in week 4, 50-yard touchdown bombs. So I just can't sell Xavier Worthy. I just can't do it. So I'm going to buy him as a result. And then Shakir, he's still Josh Allen's go-to guy. Even though I don't think that he maybe has high as a ceiling as maybe a Keon Coleman long-term, I think the Shakir is going to be super involved throughout the Bills' entire season, and having a receiver attached to Josh Allen, I feel good about. So coming off a so-so game, I don't think you're going to get much for Shakir trying to trade him away. So I would hold on to Shakir.
When I put these names together, I was thinking that on Worthy, that maybe it's an opportunity to sell because everybody sees, okay, Rashid Rice going to be out for a while. There's this, great opportunity. He had a big game in week 4, at least the big play, that it could be a sell opportunity, even if it's a guy you really like. But clearly you like him enough to not do that. Welsh, what are you doing? Higgins, Worthy, Shakir.
So I'm going to add one here. I'm going to do what T. Higgins told that fan. I'm going to bench T. Higgins. He's out of this conversation because we're going to hold Shakir. We're going to buy and sell Xavier Worthy because
Love it,
he's 100%. Well, because he's the number one, pseudo number one. I'm in. Why would I sell Worthy unless it's a stupid trade? Because if he does go into that Rashid Rice role, which by the way, I just kind of don't think they will. I think they're going to knowingly throw Justin Watson in there. Juju's going to be in there. So there's no longer, outside of Travis Kelce, I just don't think there's going to be anybody with, 8 catches per game. But Worthy's going to get a higher target share. In that same respect, if there is somebody that thinks Worthy just implants into the Rashid Rice role and they're willing to sell the moon, then you would put him in there. So in reality, I'm just like buying Worthy, I'm holding Shakir, and then I'm selling T. Higgins. That would be my overarching. But I really do think it's a buy and it's a sell for Xavier Worthy, because you have to adjust to the market. Like there's it should just be a trade that you're like, oh, I can't not do this for Worthy at this point. Otherwise, it's just not worth it off of the potential of what's there. Like Worthy's floor all of a sudden went from here up. That doesn't help for the podcast listeners, but I think it moved up like 2 notches, where before, what was the downside? 2 catches for 43 yards or something like that. I think the floor is now moved. He's probably a 4-catch guy. And what he does with his legs on a week in and week out basis, that makes it really, really exciting. The upside is what we saw with Rashid Rice, a wide receiver that's getting 7 to 8 targets. And with his legs, we know exactly what that can do. So you got to just see where your league is at. Most likely than not, you're just it's the buy hold type of thing into here. But if someone's out there willing to just go ballistic, like what if you could get Diontae Johnson plus? I was going to do that. What if you could get Diontae plus?
See, I was going to ask you that because I feel so blinded and biased by my love for Xavier Worthy that if in my inbox I got Diontae Johnson for Xavier Worthy, I would be torn in half trying to figure out what to do. What would you guys take the Diontae side then?
What if it was like Diontae and then Brooks, like Jonathan Brooks?
Stop this, Welsh.
I'm taking the Diontae side.
Yeah, I think
I'm taking the Diontae side too.
Again, that's why I want this conversation, because I admit I am so biased towards Worthy because I love the guy, but I have to realize that the other option might actually be better for me to actually score fantasy points. So,
So, I do think we agree in general that Xavier Worthy is a strong buy. You can use the trade analyzer at fantasypros.com/myplaybook or in the My Playbook app to instantly evaluate how any trade will affect your team for this week, the rest of the season, or even in Dynasty. One other buy, seller, hold trio here: Michael Pittman Jr., Brian Thomas Jr., or Rashid Shaheed, who we just mentioned in the previous segment. So again, Pittman, Brian Thomas, and Shaheed, buy, seller, hold, Welsh.
All right, we are buying Brian Thomas. They were even talking about it after the game. He's explosive. They're excited what he can do. This team will always be playing from behind, and they're going to be throwing it to him deep. So I really like Brian Thomas, especially with where his value is getting into. Like, it's not equating to like where it's going to go. We're going to hold Rashid Shaheed, and we are selling Michael Pittman off of a big game. Michael Pittman was buried down there this week, and then all of a sudden they kind of got back to it. I still think the ceiling is not big anymore with Anthony Richardson when he comes back, and some of the inconsistencies. Like maybe the downfall wasn't as big as we all said it was going to be with Michael Pittman, but okay, he's now not low 30s. Maybe he's like high 20s, 28, 29 wide receiver. I'm going to sell Michael Pittman off of this. This might be your only opportunity. Shaheed, there's no trade value. If anything, he might be kind of a buy right now. But Brian Thomas's upside really looks like it could go to a top 24 wide receiver. So that's my buy, sell, hold.
Erickson, what do you think?
I co-sign with everything Welsh said. Brian Thomas, death, taxes, and Brian Thomas going over his receiving yards prop for the week. Will absolutely love it. Maybe that's what I need to trade Xavier Worthy for, is just Brian Thomas straight up. But the issue is they're on both a lot of my teams, so I can't actually make that trade. So, sell Pittman after the Joe Flacco experience. Maybe we get it another week, in which case you can start Pittman if Flacco starts, but we don't know how long Richardson's going to be out for. And Rashid Shaheed, yes, I think that he is a hold. I think that his role is different in this offense. He's not just the, one-trick pony, Will Fuller, go downfield, get open. He's actually being used. He had a career high in catches last week, so I think he's actually like firmed as that 1B to Chris Olave's 1A in the Saints passing game. So I do like him to be a little bit more consistent this year. So he is a hold for me.
All right. Don't forget about our weekly trade live stream on our YouTube channel, where you can come and ask your specific trade questions. We'll be with you every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern. For those listening on the podcast, just go to youtube.com/fantasypros, subscribe, and click the bell to be notified of all our weekly live streams. For Erickson and Welsh, I am Ryan Wormeli. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Best of luck this week, and we'll see you next time.
I'm buying or selling all of these players.